Divorce is tough enough without the headache of figuring out what to do with your HDB flat. In Singapore, our HDB flat is not just where we stay, it's usually our biggest asset and most complex puzzle piece during a split. Whether you just collected your keys or are still waiting for your BTO to be built, here is a breakdown of how to handle your HDB flat without losing your cool during a divorce. The first scenario is if, let's say, your BTO is still under construction. If you or your spouse decide to call it quit before your BTO is being built, the situation is quite straightforward but can be painful financially. Since the flat is not ready yet, you can't sell it in the open market. In most cases, the flat will have to be surrendered back to HDB. Regarding the penalty, HDB usually takes back the flat and forfeits your 5% or 10% down payment depending on how much you put. And then in terms of the grant, any CPF housing grants you receive will have to be returned to the government with accrued interest. There are some exceptions, so sometimes HDB might allow one party to take over the BTO if they can form a new family nucleus. So for example, by bringing in a parent as a co-owner, but this is subject to strict approval. And then let's discuss another scenario where you want to get a divorce, but the flat is still within MOP. And I think this is going to be a more complex scenario because for plus and prime flats, the MOP, as you know, is 10 years, right? So the MOP is where you are supposed to live in the flat before you can sell it. If you divorce within this period, HDB's default rule is that you cannot sell the flat in the open market. So there are several options. You can surrender the flat to HDB, you can retain the flat, or you can appeal for early sale. Regarding the option to surrender to HDB, so similar to the BTO case, you can return the flat to HDB at a price they determine, but heads up that usually the amount they have is lower than the market value. Or you can try to ask to retain the flat where one person stays, but this can only be done if they meet the eligibility, which is what I've mentioned earlier. Or what you can also do is appeal for an early sale. If you have a very specific and special circumstances such as financial hardship or no way for either to keep the flat, you can appeal to HDB to let you sell it before the 5 years or 10 years MOP are up. But this is again a case-by-case situation. Now let's discuss another scenario where you want to get a divorce and your flat already passed its MOP. If you already crossed the MOP, then you have much more freedom even though it's still being governed by your divorce's ancillary matters, which is the court's decision on how to split the assets. Option number one is to sell on the open market. This is the cleanest break, where you sell the flat at market price, pay off the outstanding loan, and refund the CPF use plus interest. The remaining cash is then split between you and your spouse according to the court order. Or the second option is one party buys over the other. If one person really wants to stay, they can take over the other person's share. This is either via a transfer of ownership, where usually no cash changes hands between parties, but the CPF must be refunded, or using a process called resale of part share. Comment down below if you want me to discuss this part even further. Now, let's talk about who is eligible to keep the flat. You can't just decide to keep the flat. You must meet HDB's eligibility criteria. Generally, you can keep the flat if you have children. If you are granted care and control of the children, you can usually retain the flat under the public scheme to provide a stable home for the kids. Or if you are at least 35 years old, because under the Single Singapore Citizen Scheme, if you are 35 or older, you can hold the flat in your own name. Or you can include a parent. If let's say you are under 35 and have no children, you might be allowed to keep the flat if you add a parent's name to the ownership. But note that there are actually invisible costs. The first one is CPF accrued interest, and this is a big one. When you sell or transfer, you must pay back your CPF account the money you took out plus the 2.5% interest it would earn. Sometimes this eats up all the cash proceeds. Another one is the outstanding loan. Whoever takes over the flat must prove that they have the income to handle the mortgage alone. HDB or the bank will reassess your loan eligibility as a single person. And then there's this 30-month rule. If you sell your subsidized BTO flat after the divorce, remember there might be a 30-month waiting period before you can apply for another subsidized BTO from HDB. So to recap, let's just summarize. As you can see on the table here, if your BTO is still under construction, then the typical outcome of a divorce is for that flat to be surrendered back to HDB and down payment usually forfeited. If you get a divorce and the flat is still within MOP, typically you cannot sell on the open market and must surrender or appeal for special permission. If the flat already passed MOP, then you can sell on the open market or one party buys over the other. If you want to retain the flat with kids, there's a high chance of keeping the flat for parent with care and control of the children. But if you want to retain with no kids, then you should be above age 35 or include a parent to keep the flat. So I know that navigating divorce is never easy, but at least if you know the rule of the game, hopefully it can help you to plan your next move. If you are unsure, it's always worth the trip to go to the HDB branch office or ask in their website or have a quick chat with a proper lawyer to see where you stand legally. If you do want to go to HDB for consultation to make the process smoother at the HDB hub in Toa Payoh, please prepare these in advance. Number 1, you would need your original marriage certificate, and the next, you would need final judgment and the certificate of making interim judgment final. And then you would also need the court order, which is the instruction manual HDB follows to allow the transfer of sales. And then you also need to prepare the court order, which is the instruction manual for HDB that they will follow to allow the transfer or sale. And also you would need to provide your latest CPF statement to calculate the refund amounts. So let's summarize the post-divorce housing limits. Can you buy another HDB? If you keep the flat, of course, you can't buy another one. But if you sold or gave up the flat, then yes, you can buy another HDB once your name has been removed from the old one. Regarding the BTO waiting period, if you sold or gave up the flat, there's a 30 months waiting time if the old flat was subsidized. Regarding resale HDB, if you sold or gave up the flat, you can buy resale HDB immediately, of course, subject to loan and eligibility. What about rental HDB? So if you gave up the flat, then you might be able to rent from HDB, but you have to meet the low income criteria. So as you can see, dealing with HDB regulations while managing a divorce is a lot of paperwork. It's always a good idea to log into the HDB website using your SingPass early on to check your intent to sell or eligibility to buy status so there are no surprises later on. But what do you think? Let me know in the comment section down below. If you want to know how much can you get from the house after your divorce, check out my other video exclusively for members only. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye bye. To support my work, you can give a one-time tip by pressing the thanks button, pick the amount that you want, and click buy and send. Or you can also press the join button for exclusive contents and monthly membership. Your support means a lot to keep us independent. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye bye.